You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmering and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmering and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, "New research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest," end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, "Firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates," end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. A slave is as good as gold, Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Thursday. I hope it's a great day for you. We've got a great show today. In our second hour, Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by. What's the Fed up to? This new, hey, let's watch inflation. And has the pandemic exposed Reaganism for what it is, this failed 40-year experiment we seem to be on the tail end of? And in our third hour, Dr. Michael Mann, literally one of the world's leading climate scientists, will be dropping by. Latest reports, the Greenland ice sheet is losing 1 million tons of water a minute. What does that mean for all the rest of us? But let's start out with the RNC, the DNC, this political season, and Tom Perez, the chair of the Democratic National Committee, previously the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights and the United States Secretary of Labor. Democrats.org is the website. Tom Perez is his Twitter handle. And Secretary Perez, welcome back to the program. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on last night. I see the Washington Post spent like pages fact-checking all the lies in that series of speeches last night at the RNC.
Well, they're living in a parallel universe, Tom. We have a.
It seems
we have a pandemic of coronavirus, just crossed 180,000 deaths, and Larry Kudlow talked about coronavirus in the past tense. We have another horrific jobs report this morning, first-time claims for unemployment, and you have a president without a plan. They do not mention the name Jacob Blake because that would be inconsistent with their whole tilt to the far right. No mention of the fires in California, the hurricane, Laura, the climate crisis, because they don't have a plan. He doesn't have a plan for anything, so he distracts, and makes up stuff. And I think the one thing that they're accurate about is that they have no platform, and they had the truthfulness to acknowledge that our platform is whatever the hell Donald Trump says it's going to be, and that is one thing where they have been brutally honest.
Yeah, it seems, and it's breathtaking, frankly. I'm curious your take on. I'm not sure if this is good news or bad news. This was posted over on Daily Kos yesterday by FDR Democrat, and this poster, blogger, person says, "I'm a registered Democrat in Virginia. I received a robocall yesterday. The call lasted about 30 seconds and was a laundry list of all the bad things that would happen to me if I requested a mail-in ballot. I can't remember everything exactly, but included things like, quote, the police can track you down if you have an outstanding warrant, end quote, and, quote, the IRS can find you to collect back taxes, end quote, and ended with the words to the effect, don't let the man have your information. The voice was affecting an African-American accent and used slang like the man, making this poster think that these were robocalls that were directed toward African-Americans in Virginia. Is this a sign that they're losing and they know it, or which would be kind of good news, I suppose, or is this, are these kind of tactics, do they work, and is that really a bad, is this bad news?
Well, again, it's part of a pattern of trying to engage in voter suppression on steroids. When I headed the Civil Rights Division, I went after states that were engaged in voter ID laws that were targeting black and brown people, Native Americans as well. We saw that. Now we see voter suppression on steroids, going after the mail. There are entire disinformation campaigns that are targeting African-American voters generally, and it's not just in vote by mail. Donald Trump knows he can't win African-American voters, and he's trying to persuade them to stay home. The problem is 4 years ago, he said to African-American voters, what do you have to lose? We actually know the answer to that question now, Tom. Your life.
Your life.
Look at the coronavirus deaths, your jobs. The unemployment rate has almost doubled for African-Americans under Donald Trump. Look at the civil unrest and the absence of a plan there. What did he call African nations? I won't repeat what he called them. It was the last four words were whole. The first four were you know what. So what's happening vis-a-vis African-American voters and other voters of color is a very aggressive suppression campaign. And we knew it was coming. And we have the most robust voter protection operation that we've ever had. The broader ecosystem, we're working with our partners, Eric Holder's group, Stacey Abrams' group, other groups out there. And the most important thing that I think listeners can do today, understanding what they're doing, is to make a plan to vote. Go to iwillvote.com, Tom. Anywhere you live in the United States, you can go to iwillvote.com, one-stop shopping. You can get your registration status. You can register if you're not registered. You can request an absentee ballot. You can do anything related to voting on that site. And remember, November 3rd is the last day you can vote. It's not the first day. So make a plan, and don't make the plan the day before the election. Make a plan tomorrow, next week. Election day starts in 10 days in a number of states. So that's the key here. Let's remember the marching orders we got from John Lewis. Voting is the most remarkable nonviolent tool that we know to build a more perfect union. That's what I think of. That's why I'll be at the march, the anniversary of the March on Washington tomorrow in D.C., And my message is very clear. Make a plan. Get out there and vote. Go to iwillvote.com. And let's put an end to the most dangerous presidency in American history.
Amen. In the roughly 2.5 minutes we have left till we hit a hard break here, we're talking with Thom Perez, the chair of the Democratic National Committee, former U.S. Secretary of Labor. Secretary Perez, make an affirmative case for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as our next president and vice president, please.
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to build an America that works for everyone. We're going to build back better. We understand the pandemic is job one. If we don't fix the pandemic, we can't fix the economy. And they have a very, very clear plan that involves federal leadership for building back better by fixing our pandemic. We're building an America that works for everyone, where zip code doesn't determine destiny, where we address the issue of racial equity, where we address the fact that women doing identical work to men are still making less than men. They have a very concrete plan for addressing that. They have a concrete plan for making sure that we address the climate crisis. Again, we have 4 crises right now: our pandemic, our job loss, our civil unrest, and our climate crisis. And they're all existential. And they believe, and I believe, that civil rights is the unfinished business of America. And the way to address the racial unrest, the civil unrest, is to address the racial inequality in this country and to make sure that everybody has a seat at the table. That's what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will do. Build an America that works for everyone, not just a few at the top. Address the persistent issues of inequality that have torn our nation apart and created 2 Americas. And that's not who we are. Uniting the country, making sure that everybody has a seat at the table. That's what they're going to do. And this historic candidacy is prepared to get to work day one. The American people are asking the question, who can I trust to address these 4 crises? Who has the proven track record? Who can I believe? And I think that's Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We got to get right to work.
Yeah, I'm with you. We have 20 seconds. Do you see an affirmative right to vote being put into law or the Constitution in the near future?
I see the Voting Rights Act. When we have the Senate and the House, we will pass the Voting Rights Act to address the 2013 decision that was one of the worst days of my tenure in the Obama administration, because we need to make sure we give everybody the right to vote and acknowledge that racial discrimination in voting persists.
Yeah, amen. Thom Perez, the chair of the Democratic National Committee, former U.S. Secretary of Labor. Chairman Perez, thanks so much for dropping by. It's always great talking with you.
Great to be with you, Tom.
Thanks, and keep up the great work. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the rest of us. And welcome back. Paul in Seattle. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Honored to be on your show. I was wondering if the Democrats have access to the crosscheck database. If we did, that would be a way to have people start calling those that are targeted for suppression, find out, have them check whether or not they have been purged.
Yeah, Greg Palast got that list, and at least the Georgia part of it. He got a bunch of states. I don't recall how many, 8 or 10 or something like that. And with the Georgia list, they were able to actually contact people who were scheduled to be purged, or scheduled to be purged back when the list was put together. They contacted them and found that most of them had, in fact, been purged, and that they were still living in Georgia. They still thought they were registered as voters. They just happened to live in a part of town that tended to be more black or Hispanic. And so, there are lawsuits coming out of that. The problem is that you would have to anticipate exactly how they're comparing the list. So the bottom line, all Chris Kobach did with crosscheck was he got the lists of registered voters in a whole bunch of states. And when you compare the list of registered voters in Texas with the list of registered voters in Florida, you may find, particularly people with common names, which are particularly prevalent in the Hispanic community, in the Asian community, and more so than the white community in the black community. And so you may find, Jose Garcia in Texas and a Jose Garcia in Florida, and then both states can say, this is the same guy trying to vote twice, and they both purge him from the voting list. But you'd have to know exactly, how tightly they were doing it. Are they including middle names or not? Are they including addresses? Are they checking whether the person voted in the last election? The stuff that normally is looked at when you're making a decision to purge. And apparently they haven't been looking at that stuff, but you'd have to be able to know and anticipate all that stuff in advance. So, it's tough, but the DNC has access to all those voter databases. Go ahead, Paul.
I would think that you would assume that they would take the worst case scenario and call anybody named Jose Garcia in your state.
Yeah, it would be a start. And it would be a good and important start. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jose Garcia is the new John Smith. And there's not that many John Smiths, actually, but yes, absolutely. And I think that this really points to this larger issue. If we had an affirmative right to vote, if the Constitution or the law simply said all citizens of the United States have the right to vote, then the burden of proving that you or I should be removed from the voter list would fall on the government rather than on us. Right now, if a state government purges us from the voting lists, we have to go to that government and petition them to put us back on. We have to beg them. If we had an absolute right to vote, then the state would have to come to us and would have to, ask us, are you still here? Are you still you? They would have to, the burden of proof would be on them rather than us. And that's why I mentioned when I was talking to Tom Perez an affirmative right to vote. Paul, thanks for the call. Great to hear from you. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Daily rants and weekly op-eds at HartmannReport.com. It's free and there's no ads. HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a special new video up for supporters of our program. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, there is so much going on. So it is, it's like, I don't know where to begin. Well, actually, I do know where to begin. I watched the Republican convention last night, and I watch it so you don't have to. Oh God, it was a gruel. I mean, it was just genuinely bizarre stuff. And at the same time that Tucker Carlson was defending this 17-year-old killer, I mean, it gets so strange that some of the headlines from the right wing. This is incredible. From Outkick, LeBron James is a bigot. From the Washington Examiner, the NBA playoff boycotts are an empty gesture. The PJ Media, good riddance. NBA may cancel season in protest of Jacob Blake shooting. The American Spectator, the seeds of a civil war in Kenosha. New York Post, craven Democrats invite violence. InfoWars, GoFundMe, nukes Kyle Rittenhouse. He's the 17-year-old kid who murdered a couple of people. Fundraiser I'm not going to call him a kid anymore. I'm going to call him a Trump supporter, because that's what he is. He was in the front row of a Trump rally that he had to travel quite a distance to get to. It was in Iowa back in January, literally in the front row. So, this Trump humper is a murderer. And I think there's a connection between the two. Anyhow, the headline over at InfoWars, GoFundMe nukes Kyle Rittenhouse fundraiser allows BLM rioters to receive $1 million in donations. American thinker, lefties try to get Tucker Carlson fired over Kenosha commentary. Town hall, what's behind the violence in America? Hint, it's black people and Democrats. And, on it goes. So, but the Washington Post put together a pretty good fact check. And I want to, quote in part from that, but also from just what I saw. Vice President Pence started out by talking about how Trump saved countless lives in America by putting a ban on flights from China. Well, actually, there were 11 exemptions to those flights, so over 40,000 people came into the United States from China after Trump's ban. 40,000. Trump's ban didn't happen until after 38 other countries had done the same thing. He was a laggard, as they say. And a total of 430,000 people came in from China from January when the virus was circulating in China. So, basically. So, number two, where this president achieved energy independence for the United States, Joe Biden would abolish fossil fuels and fracking. All of those are lies. We are not energy independent. In fact, we imported, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, part of Pence's administration, in 2019, the U.S. imported 9.1 million barrels per day of petroleum from nearly 90 other countries. And as to Joe Biden doing away with fossil fuels and fracking, well, yeah, that plan spans at least 30 years. He's calling for net zero carbon emissions no later than 2050. That's 30 years from now. Mike Pence said, when asked whether Biden support cutting funding to law enforcement, he replied, yes, absolutely. As the Washington Post says, this is simply false. In other words, it's a lie. Mike Pence looked right into the camera last night and lied to the American people. In fact, I guess the biggest question I have is, are the American people still buying Republican lies? What Biden actually said to CBS, they said, do you support defunding the police? And he said, no, I don't support defunding the police. I support conditioning federal aid to police based on whether they meet certain basic standards of decency and honorableness. And in fact, are they able to demonstrate that they can protect the community and everybody in the community? Pence, this one just blew my mind. In this trembling voice, Mike Pence was, Dave Patrick Underwood was an officer of the Department of Homeland Security's Federal Protection Service who was shot and killed during the riots in Oakland, California. As if Black Lives Matter rioters had killed this guy. He was actually killed by Air Force Staff Sergeant Stephen Carrillo, who is a Boogaloo boy, a right-wing killer. But Pence didn't see fit to point that out. He, a supporter of Donald Trump killed David Patrick Underwood. And Pence, this is bizarre. Pence, last week, Joe Biden didn't say one word about the violence and chaos engulfing cities across this country. Right. Actually, what Biden says was protesting brutality is a right and absolutely necessary, but burning down communities is not protest. It's needless violence, violence that endangers lives. Once again, Mike Pence lying to the American people. Pence continues, after many years of scandal robbed our veterans of the care that you earned in the uniform of the United States, President Trump kept his word again. He reformed the VA, and Veterans Choice is now available for every veteran in America. This was a law passed in 2014 and signed into law by Barack Obama. Pence went on to say, 4 years ago, we inherited a military hollowed out by devastating budget cuts. We rebuilt our military. Well, actually, the military budget had declined, but why? Because the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were winding down. There's an absolute one-to-one relationship between the two. Pence went on to say the Obama-Biden administration secretly launched a surveillance operation on the Trump campaign. No, wrong. The FBI did, because Mike Flynn was talking to Russians that he shouldn't have been talking to. while he was making the transition, while he was not in office. It's a violation of the Logan Act, if nothing else. And, it continues from there. We'll be back in just a minute. It's 28 minutes
You're
past the
listening to
hour.
the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I've got a bit more of a rant for you, and I want to talk about the coronavirus as well. There's just so much going on, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. We'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Michael Lewis's new book, The Fifth Risk. And this is from the prologue, which is titled Lost in Transition. Chris Christie noticed a piece in the New York Times. That's how it all started. The New Jersey governor had dropped out of the presidential race in February 2016 and thrown what support he had behind Donald Trump. In late April, he saw the article. It described meetings between representatives of the remaining candidates still in the race: Trump, John Kasich, Ted Cruz, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders, and the Obama White House. Anybody who still had any kind of shot at becoming president of the United States apparently needed to start preparing to run the federal government. The guy Trump sent to the meeting was, in Christie's estimations, comically underqualified. Christie called up Trump's campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, to ask why this critical job hadn't been handed to someone who actually knew something about government. Lewandowski said, "We don't have anyone." Christie volunteered himself for the job, head of the Donald Trump presidential transition team. "It's the next best thing to being president," he told friends. "You get to plan the presidency." He went to see Trump about it. Trump said he didn't want a presidential transition team. Why did anyone need to plan anything before he actually became president? "It's legally required," said Christie. Trump asked where the money was going to come from to pay for the transition team. Christie explained that Trump could either pay for it himself or take it out of campaign funds. Trump didn't want to pay for it himself, and he didn't want to take it out of campaign funds either, but he agreed grudgingly that Christie could go ahead and raise a separate fund to pay for his transition team. But not too much, he said. And so Christie set out to prepare for the unlikely event that Donald Trump would one day be elected president of the United States. Not everyone in Trump's campaign was happy to see him on the job. In June, Christie received a note from Trump advisor Paul Manafort. "The kid is paranoid about you," Manafort said. The kid was Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law. Back in 2005, when he was U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, Christie had prosecuted and jailed Kushner's father, Charles, for tax fraud. Christie's investigation revealed in the bargain that Charles Kushner had hired a prostitute to seduce his own brother-in-law, whom he suspected of cooperating with Christie, had videotaped the sexual encounter and sent the tape to his sister. The Kushners apparently took their grudges seriously, and Christie sensed that Jared still harbored one against him. On the other hand, Trump, whom Christie considered almost a friend, couldn't have cared less. He'd invited Christie to his and Melania's wedding, and he pressed him to attend his daughter Ivanka and Jared Kushner's wedding. "That would be awkward," said Christie. "I'm paying for the wedding, and I don't give an S," said Donald. Christie viewed Jared as one of those people who thinks that because he's rich, he must also be smart. Still, he had a certain cunning about him. And Christie soon found himself reporting everything he did to prepare for a Trump administration to an executive committee. The committee consisted of Jared, Ivanka Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, Paul Manafort, Steve Mnuchin, and Jeff Sessions. "I'm kind of like the church elder who double counts the collection plate every Sunday for the pastor," said Sessions, who appeared uncomfortable with the entire situation. The elder's job became more complicated in July 2016 when Trump was formally named the Republican nominee. The transition team now moved into an office in downtown Washington, D.C. and went looking for people to occupy the top 500 jobs in the federal government. They needed to fill all of the cabinet positions, of course, but also a whole bunch of others that no one in the Trump campaign even knew existed. It's not obvious how you find the next Secretary of State, much less the next Secretary of Transportation. Never mind who should sit on the Board of Trustees of the Barry Goldwater Scholarship and Excellence in Education Foundation. By August, 130 people were showing up every day, and hundreds more working part-time at Trump Transition headquarters at the corner of 17th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue. The transition team made lists of likely candidates for all 500 jobs, plus other lists of informed people to roll into the various federal agencies the day after the election to be briefed on whatever the federal agencies were doing. They gathered the names for these lists by traveling the country and talking to people, Republicans who had served in government, Trump's closest advisors, recent occupants of the jobs that needed filling. Then they set about investigating any candidates for glaring flaws and embarrassing secrets and conflicts of interest. At the end of each week, Christie handed over binders with lists of names of people who might do the job well to Jared and Donald and Eric and the others. They probed everything, says a senior Trump transition official. Who is this person? Where did this person come from? They only ever rejected one person, Paul Manafort's secretary. The first time Donald Trump paid attention to any of this was when he read about it in the newspaper. The story revealed that Trump's very own transition team, led by New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, had raised several $1 million to pay for its own staff. The moment he saw it, Trump called Steve Bannon, the chief executive of his campaign, from his office on the 26th floor of the Trump Tower and told him to come immediately to his residence many floors above. Bannon stepped off the elevator to find the governor of New Jersey seated on a sofa, being hollered at. Trump was apoplectic, actually yelling, "You're stealing my money! You're stealing my effing money! What the F is this?" Seeing Bannon, Trump turned on him and screamed, "Why are you letting him steal my effing money?" Bannon and Christie together set out to explain to Trump federal law. Months, and it continues from there. The book is The Fifth Risk by Michael Lewis. On this week's Science Revolution, Ethan Manuel with Sierra Club's Land Protection Program is here on Trump greenlighting drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Will the oil companies show up? Adrian Shelley with Public Citizen is dropping by on the methane rule rollback and the Trump administration's continued assault on our climate. Lori Lodes with Climate Power 2020 is excited about Biden and Harris painting a bold climate action plan with clean energy jobs. Plus, in geeky science, there's a new study out. Do plant-based meats improve your heart? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So yesterday, or was it the day before yesterday, the CDC said, no, you may not get a test unless you have symptoms. We're going to start ignoring the idea that there's pre-symptomatic spread, that people who don't have symptoms are capable of spreading the disease. When in fact we know that on average, that would be, people in their 40s, 50s is probably the average age of Americans right now. On average, about half of people who get this virus just spread it. They don't get symptoms, but they do share it with other people. They do spread it to other people. Among kids, it's much higher. It's around 90%. You don't get symptoms, but they do spread it. So why did the CDC change their rules? Well, Mike Pence's chief of staff, Mark Short, was on TV this morning on either CNN or MSNBC, and they asked him that question, and he said, because of the backlog in testing, we can't test enough people fast enough, so we need to slow down the number of people going into the testing pool. Which raises the question, why not increase the number of tests available? I mean, we've been calling for this since January. Have the federal government produce tests. Have the federal government order companies to produce tests. Use the Defense Production Act. I mean, there's so many things that could be done. But, this decision by the CDC, it's going to make it harder for people to get tests. It's going to make it much easier for insurance companies to refuse to pay for tests. And, we've seen over and over and over again, you show up at an ER and say, I think I should be tested. My son came over yesterday and his wife or girlfriend has COVID or something like that. I mean, I've been exposed. It can cost you anywhere from $1,500 to $10,000 to show up at a hospital ER and simply get a coronavirus test. And insurance companies are increasingly saying, if you're not sick enough to be admitted into the hospital, we're not paying for that damn test. And the CDC just doubled down on this. I mean, this is crazy. And I think what's going on here is that Trump knows that this policy, and by the way, Anthony Fauci was having surgery on his vocal cords He was under general anesthetic. He was literally unconscious. So they call this emergency meeting to change CDC policy because he's not there. And I mean, I think what's going on here is that they know, and Trump knows, that this policy is going to drop the numbers that we're seeing very quickly. You're going to start seeing, oh, instead of 60,000 new cases a day, we're down to 50,000. Now we're down to 40,000. I think we were 47,000 yesterday. Pretty soon we're going to be down to 35 or 30,000. But it won't be because there's fewer cases. It'll be because there's fewer tests being done, so fewer cases we're identifying, which is going to make it impossible to do contact tracing and things like that. But it also means that there's going to be a lot of people running around who are contagious who don't realize it, and they're going to be spreading this virus. So what you're going to see is an explosion in cases. But it's not going to show up in the numbers over the next 4 or 5 weeks. And as Tom Perez pointed out, early voting starts in just a week and a half, 2 weeks. We are very close to this election. Right? I mean, September 1st is next week, and the election's the first week of October. We're there. Excuse me, of November. We're there. It's 2 months away. Thank you, Sean. 2 months away. And so, forgive my math. So here we are, 2 months out. Early voting starts in 2 weeks. And Trump is just looking at this saying, from the time somebody gets infected until the time they end up a fatality statistic is typically 2 months. It takes a couple of weeks for symptoms to show up. Then it takes typically they get worse on the 10th or 11th day, and then you go to the hospital, and then you're hospitalized for a week or two, and then you're intubated for a week or two, and then you die. I mean, that's the course. And so he's figuring, by the time most people have voted, that's when the deaths are going to start showing up. So he's just going to hand them off to Joe Biden, or he's just going to ignore them. To call the Republican Party a death cult is almost an understatement. I mean, whether it's tearing children from their families and letting many of them die, we've had any number of children die, immigrants' children die, in the hands of Donald Trump's ICE, or promoting policies that caused nearly 200,000 Americans so far to die from this virus, or encouraging deadly violence against people protesting racism. Trump and the GOP are all in on violence and brutality and death. And the question is, are Americans going to wake up? The other thing I wanted to rant about for just a minute, and then I'll get to your calls. This story, ProPublica, a great organization. They do marvelous, extraordinary investigative journalism. They've got an app, by the way, for the iPhone. I assume they have one for Android as well. That's a great little news app. They just did a massive investigation across the United States and found that black people are 3 times more likely to have a limb amputated because of diabetes than white people. Now, what this is pointing to, and maybe I'm just hypersensitive to this right now because I'm writing a book about the hidden history of healthcare that'll be out next fall, but and I keep encountering this in all the research I'm doing. I point back to April 6th, when all the media announced the research that found that black people were far more likely, almost twice as likely, as white people to die from COVID-19. And that was the point at which all of a sudden the Trump administration, the right-wing think tanks, Freedom Works, all these other groups, the Chamber of Commerce, they all started saying, hey, time to open America back up. It's only black people dying. And what gets lost in this conversation, and I think is the really important point to make, is black people are more than twice as likely to die from everything. They're more likely to die from cancer. They're more likely to die from heart disease. They're more likely to die from 3 times more likely to lose a limb to diabetes, more likely to die or become blind from diabetes. Does it have anything to do with genetics? No. Other than the impact of having your genetics visible in as much as your skin is dark. That's it. There is no, health-wise genetic reason for this, that black people die at a higher rate from heart disease. They're about the only condition that black people are more likely to have than white people is sickle cell anemia. And sickle cell anemia is not associated with any of these things. And that's it. The simple fact of the matter is that, it wasn't until the 1960s that most black people in America could even get admitted to a hospital. African Americans in this country died with serious diseases at home. I just finished researching and wrote this mind-boggling chapter about Medicare, how when LBJ passed Medicare in 1967, and they put it into place in 9 months. And during that time, virtually every hospital in America was segregated. And across the South, there were many hospitals that just, period, flat out didn't take black people. And just go home and die, sorry. And even if you did go to a hospital that took black people, you had to wait until the doctors were done serving all the white people, which sometimes took a couple of days. And when they passed Medicare, the Johnson administration surreptitiously created an alliance with a bunch of civil rights groups, including SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the NAACP. And they had people going into these hospitals to find out if they were segregated or not, because the law said you can't get Medicare money if you're still segregated. And you had 10,000 hospitals that were segregated in the United States. They desegregated every hospital in America in less than 1 year. And how did they do it? They said, hey, you want the money? Old people are very expensive. They were as much as 50% of the budgets of some of these hospitals within a year or two. But that's the one great leap forward we have had in my lifetime in terms of medical care for African Americans. But in every other regard, black Americans are less likely to get painkillers at the same level as white Americans. They're less likely to get chemo. They're less likely to get treatments for heart disease. They're less likely to get treatment for diabetes, and particularly aggressive treatment or any kind of treatment that requires regular monitoring. And this all has to do with racism in the system and the racist assumptions that get built into us by our culture, like the assumption that black people don't experience pain like white people do, which is complete nonsense. I shouldn't even have to say that. Except literally, studies done 2 years ago in hospitals found that black people got fewer pain medications than white people. So when they talk about black people dying at disproportionate rates from COVID, they really need to be pointing out that it's not just COVID. And by the way, that might scare some white people, because it's not that COVID kills black people. It's that COVID kills anybody who gets it, or has the potential to, certainly, particularly if they're suffering from any kind of medical condition. And black people are more likely to be suffering from those conditions as a result of poverty, but most importantly, racism. Even wealthy black people get worse treatment in our healthcare system than poor white people. Anyhow, end of rant. I'll pick up your phone calls after this. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls in just a minute. And welcome back. Tony in Long Beach, California. Hey, Tony, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was just calling to say that a lot of my friends and I, we are not voting for Biden, and the main reason is the fact that...
Tony, I'm going to cut you off. I don't put people on the air who say that we're not going to vote for Biden. I don't care what your reason is. It ain't happening on my show. Steve in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Steve, what's going on?
Well, I got to tell you, Tom, I think that it's in human nature, and especially American human nature, because we're raised to be good capitalist consumers, hedonists, Disneyland, and binging on, Tony Soprano and Breaking Bad, and have fun and ignore the bad things that are happening, like you're on the Titanic and it's sinking, but party on. But now, as you've said, we're totally at a deflection point. Look at the list of things we're facing that we we need to get super serious as individuals. We can't count on the politicians. Anthropogenic mass extinction, climate change, people who want a new civil war, police that are on the side of those people, a president who's a gangster and is allied with gangsters, environmental problems, fires, economic problems, people hating each other, gun violence. The list goes on and on. It's time for all of us to grow up, be more responsible in our personal lives, get a spiritual life so that we know how to, that we can, comfort ourselves as well as strengthen ourselves, and make a greater proportion of our mental space and time to fixing ourselves and this country before it's too late. We are in a fire, but I'll leave you with this. When you saw what happened in Lebanon with government corruption that's pretty much as bad as here, and then that big explosion, the people of Lebanon,
it's far
starving in a failed state, they went out in the streets and they threatened their leaders and said, you either do what's right or we're going to come and get you. The American people, other than Black Lives Matter and allied groups, are largely like sheep, sitting back and hoping that voting might change it. I'm saying we have to vote for Biden and Harris and all Democrats and get rid of McConnell, et cetera, but we also have to change who we are, and every single day we have to fight the new American revolution and really make this country great again.
Yeah, I can't disagree with your sentiments. Spot on. Thank you. Wally in Cleveland. Hey, Wally, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I've been thinking about something I have heard no mention of, and that is if we're at cases about 50 to 60,000 per day, and if that's going to happen, which I'm sure it will, 4 weeks before election, you do the math, multiply it, you could have 2 million people that are, for one, scared to death. We don't know how each individual is going to handle that. Are they going to vote? Or are they not going to vote due to it? And that's an awful lot, big, high percentage, I think, that we're going to lose of voters due to that.
Yeah. Yes. Increasingly, what's happening, I mean, these are anecdotal reports, of course, but, we're hearing from hospitals and things that a lot of the cases that are coming in now are coming in as a consequence of people not wearing masks. So it may be that the people who are dying off and being intubated are the Trump humpers. I don't know. Wally, thanks for the call. There's going to be a lot of analysis done for a lot of years about the consequences of this particular pandemic on this particular election, as well as a whole bunch of other, consequences or side effects of it. For data geeks, it's going to be a fascinating time. We'll be right back. The hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment tells how the Second Amendment was written to protect Georgia's slave patrols. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Oh, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Dennis in Bergenfield, New Jersey. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I'd like to ask about supply-side economics or Reaganomics. So I understand you think it's a fraud, which I agree, but my question is, do you believe it causes the economy to go into a recession, crash? Do you think supply side causes a recession?
To the extent that this exacerbates the wealth imbalance, that it strips wealth from the working class and lower classes of Americans and transfers that wealth to the very, very rich, which is exactly what we've seen. I mean, massive transfers of wealth, trillions and trillions of dollars since 1980. What that does is it makes the economy progressively more and more top-heavy. And so when it falls over a lot harder. And when bubbles happen, they happen much more aggressively, as we're seeing right now with the stock market. Did I answer your question, Dennis?
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say is the rich, they'll take that money and they'll invest it somewhere, and that'll create an economic bubble. And basically, like what we saw in 2000.
Right, because they're not actually investing it in productive things. I mean, apparently our latency is getting bad here, and my apologies, Dennis, because there's a delay. But they're not investing it in productive things. Trillions of dollars have been given to giant corporations by the Trump administration, first with two massive tax cuts, and then with the whole coronavirus bailout bill. A trillion of that went to big corporations. Did they invest in factories? No. Did they increase pay to their workers? No. Did they make more products? No. What they used that money for was to buy their own stock. By buying their own stock, they're creating demand for their own stock, which drives up the price of their stock. It's not necessarily driving up the value, it drives up the price of that stock. And then, of course, those senior executives are compensated based on stock price. So it's a scam. It's just a scam. And supply-side economics is what set it up. Dennis, thanks for the call. Sharon in Greenville, South Carolina. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, thank you so much for taking my call, and I am a loyal watcher of yours. I've had three quick things. The first one is there is a thing where Trumpy asked for all the voter registration rolls right after he went in office, and a lot of states refused to send them to him. I think that they want people to have to go in person to vote, and the Russians are already working 24/7 to hack in to some of the voter registration precincts. And I really think that is happening. Number two that I have for you was the policeman that shot Mr. Blake. My opinion is that a call went out to some of the white supremacists that is on these police forces, and they were told, you go find anybody you can to shoot them, because that was the game plan, was to start riots and upset. And while those riots were being shown on TV, they were talking about it on their little sorry convention, which I did not watch. So, you've got three things going on there. And back to the civil rights thing, where I am from in South Carolina, they did not start. They allowed blacks in the hospital, 67 or whatever, but they were on a separate floor. So, that's the three things. My other thing is I still think there is a correlation between the article that Matt Cole and Jeremy Scahill wrote that goes back to Eric Prince and them setting up a separate little division under the guise of Homeland Security. And I think it all ties in with the overtake of this country by someone that wants to be a dictator and by Putin. I think Putin is controlling it. He's controlling the gameplay. He's controlling what is said and what is done. And I think he owns him.
Oh. Yeah, we got a report this morning from, I believe it was the foreign minister of the United Kingdom. I'd have to go back and look at the report, but it was one of these foreign diplomats who said he was in the room when Trump was told that Putin had tried to call him and they weren't able to put the call through because he was busy with presumably this foreign minister and others, and that Trump started yelling and screaming and just got a rage attack that he missed his phone call from Putin. You've got to wonder what the hell is going on with this. But spot on, Sharon. And it turns out that this 17-year-old Trump humper, this Trump, fanboy who was literally in the front row, 10 feet away from Donald Trump, drove all the way to Iowa for this rally. He lives in Illinois, for this rally. And I'm wondering, by the way, where the hell are this kid's parents? But that this kid was part of a Facebook group that was literally calling on people to bring guns to Kenosha, Wisconsin, to do apparently exactly what this kid did, or something close to it, or at least be available should the opportunity present itself, as it were. And it's just so wrong. It is just so wrong, everything that's happening with regard to this. Sharon, thanks so much for the call. It's very nice to hear from you. We'll be back. We're gonna be talking with Professor Richard Wolff right after the break, find out what's going on with our economy and what's going on with the Fed. I've been scratching my head on this. I've read 4 articles on it, and I still don't understand it. The Fed says they're going to do something about inflation. You know, they want to raise inflation. Why? How? What's going on? We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had master-slaves, feudalism had lord-serfs, and monarchy had king-subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff. So far, the fear is really a deep problem for democratic sector.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, author of numerous books. His most recent, Understanding Socialism. Democracyatwork.info is the website, as well as rdwolff with 2fs.com. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff. And Professor Wolff, I'm curious. I want to get into a conversation with you about kind of post-capitalism or the new normal. But before we do that, real quickly, I'm curious your take on what the Fed what Jerome Powell announced yesterday at the Jackson Hole virtual event, where he basically said, we're going to try and keep inflation above 2%. What is this? Why? Can they pull it off? Does it matter? What's going on?
Yeah, well, this needs to be unpacked because the language Mr. Powell uses is really much more about mystifying than clarifying. Here's what it means. We are in the depths of a serious depression in which tens of millions of people have lost their job, and a good number of them have no prospect of getting it back. Serious, severe unemployment on a scale we have not seen since the Great Depression of the 1930s, number one. Number two, the government of the United States is not doing anything about it. That is, we are not doing what we did in the 1930s, which is to create government jobs, to say to the people, if you can't get a job in the private sector, if the capitalist employers either don't want or don't care about what happens to you or want to hire you, the government will. That would be the solution we could and should use right now. But Mr. Powell knows that the government of the United States, surely under the Republicans and Trump, have no intention of doing it. Obviously, they haven't. But if you listen to the Biden Democrats, you don't see much more. $300 billion, which is the number he's thrown around, would not begin to create a public employment program of the sort we need. So what needs to be done isn't being done, isn't even being contemplated. So what's left? Long-term unemployment in the tens of millions? That's going to shake this society to its foundations. So they're desperate, and that's really the important thing here. What are we going to do? And what he said yesterday is the following. We're going to keep interest rates virtually zero. We're going to pump more money, I'm talking trillions of dollars, into the economy, and if that creates an inflation, a rising prices beyond our previous limit of so-called 2%, well, so be it. Things are so desperate, we're going to have to risk an inflation because the alternative is even worse for us, another sign of devastation. And let me finish by saying this is unbelievably bad news for the American economy, that they're this desperate. But also, if they let an inflation go, and by proclaiming the 2%, he's averaging what will come in the years ahead, which is much more than 2%, because it will be averaged with recent years, which have come in at much below 2%. So what we're seeing is a prognosis from the man in charge that we're going to see prices rising 3, 4, 5, 6, who knows what percentage. And given a country in which most people are having a hard time making ends meet as it is, try to factor in rising prices, and you are proposing something that risks savaging the working class of this country.
And that President Biden would inherit an economy sort of like the one Jimmy Carter inherited from Nixon and Ford, with all this inflation baked into it. I'm curious or it seems like what you're saying basically is there's two ways to reinflate an economy that has crashed. One would be to inject money at the bottom, at the level of the worker through a massive government jobs program like FDR did. That worked. That got us out of the Great Depression. The other way to do it is to try to stimulate the economy the way that Reagan tried to do when there was a slight recession when he came into office, which is pour money into the banks and into the billionaires and hope that some fraction of it trickles down to the bottom. And that Powell is basically saying, we're going to double down on the trickle-down strategy. We're not going to feed the bottom up. We're going to feed the top down. And it's so ineffective that the side effect of this is going to be massive inflation, which is just going to devastate people on fixed incomes. But that's mostly old people and people on welfare, so who cares about that? Is that a good summary?
Absolutely. Yes, and I would only add the part you left out. They've been doing that already. We know what is going on. The money is not going into creating jobs, nor will it. It's going into the stock market where there has been a massive inflation. It's just wonderful good news for the few who own significant amounts of shares. It leaves the rest of the economy in a shambles. But that failure is being rationalized by the Fed in order to continue the very policies that produced that failure. historians will look back on this moment and shake their heads at so much going on in this country, but this action by the Fed, the refusal to face up to the failure of what they've done and the need to intervene directly to give people jobs and incomes, stupefying, really genuinely stupefying.
Well, and I think it's a great segue, we have 3 minutes left, into my question, is this the new normal? It seems to me that the trend that Reaganism put us on of wiping out small and medium-sized businesses by not enforcing the anti-monopoly laws and other policies, wiping out the middle class by lowering taxes on the very, very wealthy, things like that, that what the coronavirus has done is simply accelerate. It's not like there's something new going on here. It has simply accelerated a trend that has been going on for 40 years, and that a lot of these low-income jobs and a lot of these small employers, these small companies, small and medium-sized companies that are going out of business and that are losing and the people who are losing their jobs are literally never going to get them back. That this is like the end point of Reaganism happening in 1 year when it would have been maybe another 10 or 20 years. What do you think of that analysis?
I like it. I think it's correct. I think you already saw it, that you didn't react to the dot-com crisis in 2000 in a way that you could have. You didn't learn anything. You did the same thing on a larger scale against the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008. That didn't work either. So now you're tripling down, if you like, by doing the same thing again. I fear that what you have going on here is a willingness of those at the top in the pursuit of ever more wealth on the fantastic scales of Jeffrey Bezos and all the rest, that the mass of the American people can be reduced to what we used to watch on television in National Geographic programs about poor countries far away. We're going to have enclaves of the rich surrounded by masses of people barely getting by. It's an amazing thing to try to do in any country, but in one that used to celebrate the big middle class and the American dream, I don't think it's politically doable.
Yeah, I worked in Bogota, Colombia, in Lima, Peru, in Mexico City, in numerous cities around Eastern Africa and Southeast Asia. And one of the things that I saw over and over and over again were slums, basically. They had different names for them, that were fenced in. They'd put these giant concrete fences around them with razor wire on top of them, and basically keep the slum dwellers in. They could go in and out on the buses to go to work, to serve the wealthy people or even the middle class, but that was it. Do you see that coming to America?
Yes. The only question is whether the mass of people who for a while in the 20th century were strong enough to rise up during the Great Depression and to demand to be treated differently and to succeed in that demand. It's unclear to me that that generation or even its children and grandchildren will accept being pushed back. That genie once out of the bottle, it's not so easy to put it back. And I think there are the political struggles that are coming.
There you go, that genie of the middle class. Remarkable. Right. Professor Richard Wolff, I always learn something from you. Thank you so much for dropping by today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
And Professor Wolff's work you can find over at democracyatwork.info, rdwolff with 2fs.com, and you can tweet him at Prof. Wolff. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
More of the news of the day. We've got this robocall from these Trump humpers in Michigan now. I'll share that with you after the break. Stick around. And welcome back. Jessica in Chicago, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Jessica, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. After Mr. Wolff, I was just thinking how Yang ran on helping the people to give them $1,000 a month. My daughter has a roommate in India, and actually the county that her relatives lived in, India gave out all these people $1,000 a month to get the money back into the hands of people. So, yeah, it's so unbelievable that our country is so greedy. But I'm so happy. I wanted to say I loved that you touched on the racism in the healthcare system. Yeah, it's insane. And then reason I called, I'm so proud of the NBA for being so strong and canceling their games. I feel like that makes my protesting worthwhile. The last two protests I did for the post office, we were yelled at by the Trump booger boys. They don't even wear masks. And and then I wanted to ask you a question. What happens to all these wealthy people who bet on sports? All these sports people, I'm so proud of them. If they protest long enough, it's going to get the wealthy people mad too.
Yeah, I don't know, Jessica. I am such not a sports fan that when I read that the NBA was not going to play their games, I was like, which sport is that? It took me a little bit to figure out that it was basketball. It is basketball, right? Oh, it's baseball. Okay, so there you go.
It is basketball, but I think baseball's going to do it too.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I ultimately figured out. And now there's talk, the football is going to be doing it too. And I think that, this is a really good and healthy thing. And this is what happens when people wake up and when you actually empower people who have historically been oppressed. I mean, you've got, large chunks of the players in all of these sports now are African Americans, and they've got power. I mean, you've got people who are making millions of dollars a year in their salaries, and they are exercising that power, and that's great. And this is the Republicans' greatest nightmare, that more black people across the United States in a broader spectrum than just professional sports start acquiring wealth and political power and start saying, we would like to just have the same say the white people do. Right, we would just like to, it's not like the dystopia that Donald Trump is envisioning of or that was characterized in Birth of a Nation, of these god awful stereotypes of black people running things. But instead, it's just hey, we're human beings too, and we would like to have the same rights and the same say. And by the way, please stop killing us. And really, the by the way part is the front and center right now. With all of this stuff, it's just it's remarkable, and we still have such a long way to go, and then you get these commentators saying, or for that matter, politicians saying, there is no more racism in America. I forget who it was who said it 2 nights ago at the Republican. It was Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley said, America's not a racist nation. Really? Nikki, let me tell you about Plessy versus Ferguson. Let me tell you about Dred Scott. We're not a racist country? Really? Let me tell you about the Voting Rights Act and why it was necessary, or the Civil Rights Act and why it was necessary, and why would the white guys on the Supreme Court want to gut it? Well, and Clarence Thomas, too. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag You're It. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the 4th in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag You're It. Welcome back. So these Jacob Wohl and Jack Berkman, a couple of white guys, the infamously inept Trump-loving dirty tricksters, they tried to smear Robert Mueller, you'll recall, a year or so ago we were talking about them. They've got a new robocall out. This is the one I was reading about to Tom Perez. And Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson today, just a few hours ago, posted an audio clip of this robocall and said, these are basically lies.
This is Tamika Taylor from Project 1599, a civil rights organization founded by Jack Berkman and Jacob Wolff. Mail-in voting sounds great, but did you know that if you vote by mail, your personal information will be part of a public database that will be used by police departments to track down old warrants and be used by credit card companies to collect outstanding debt? The CDC is even pushing to use records for mail-in voting to track people for mandatory vaccines. Don't be finessed into giving your private information to the man. Stay safe and beware of vote by mail.
Wow. This is a campaign by a couple of white Republicans targeting African Americans, saying the police will track you down, the IRS will track you down, and the CDC is going to want to forcibly vaccinate you if you vote by mail. The simple reality is voting by, requesting an absentee ballot does not put you on any list, period. I mean, you've got the absentee ballot list that the state has, but I mean, any list that anybody can read, the simple reality is if you're registered as a voter, that is a public record already. And, there's people that can acquire those lists. You can acquire that list. But, the idea that the police are going to use this to come after you for outstanding warrants and which means, of course, well, even if I don't have outstanding warrants, if the police are going to be knocking door to door, I mean, look at what happened to Breonna Taylor. It could happen to me. This is voter suppression. And it's evil. They've released the names of the people that were killed by this 17-year-old Trump humper, the Trump fan who stood in the front row of Donald Trump's Iowa rally, and then went on to murder a couple of people. Anthony Huber, Huber, maybe it's Huber, was one. He was the hero who actually tried to take the gun away from this guy in Kenosha. And this 17-year-old Trump humper turned around and shot him with it. And he's dead, of course. This is just not good. There was a great, trying to find it here. Well, somebody on Twitter said, how many Trumps could a Trump humper hump if a Trump humper could hump Trump? And it's like, oh, jeez. Oh, man. Okay, let's pick up your phone calls here. Ben in Chicago. Hey, Ben, what's up?
Hi, Tom. This stuff is just absolutely crazy, and I'm tired of the constant barrage of lies and racism and deceit. Anyways, what I was calling about is you were talking about the coronavirus and the testing after you have symptoms. And one thing I find quite ironic is that I had all of the symptoms about a month and a half ago. And I called my doctor, and my doctor said, I want you to go to this place and get tested right away. He said, it could be the flu, but all the symptoms point to corona. Well, when I called the place to set up an appointment or time to get tested, they said, well, we don't want you to come in. That's not a good idea because you could infect other people. So this whole thing about, you can't get tested before you have symptoms. Now you can only get tested if you know you have symptoms. And yet, I don't know if anything is going to change with this new CDC ruling, but, they don't want you to get tested when you have symptoms. So the next step is for the antibodies. And by that time, you're over the symptoms. So, right. So I'm not exactly sure.
So Ben, they wouldn't even come out in the parking lot and test you?
No, they told me not to come in, not to go, to stay at home.
Always that.
And it was so. In fact, I actually called. I'm in Chicago here. I actually called the mayor's office because it sounded so weird to me. And then as I was, they said they would look into it. And as I was researching later, because it just sounded so weird, that was absolutely the case. They did not want you to come in if you had symptoms. So this whole thing, as you just said, this whole thing about, don't get tested until you have symptoms, I don't know how that's supposed to work. And what your screener said to me, which made a lot of sense, she says, in other words, they don't want you to get tested. That's absolutely right.
Right, and Pence's guy, Mark Short, on TV this morning said basically the reason that they only want people to get tested who have symptoms is because the tests are taking 10 to 14 days. And, it doesn't matter. There's, jams in the pipeline, so we need to reduce the number of people getting tested. Well, just surprise, that's going to reduce the number of people being identified as having this virus, which looks good for Donald Trump politically, right, but is a public health disaster. It means that there's going to be far more people running around infecting others and not realizing it. Ben, thank you for the story. Thanks for sharing your experience with us. We'll be back with more of your calls after this. What a day. In the meantime, by the way, we've got a hurricane. Hurricane Laura just hit the Gulf Coast, Texas and Louisiana. Louisiana really got the brunt of it. At the same time that Donald Trump is depleting the FEMA budget with his $300 a week.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
He's ripping $44 billion right out of FEMA. And, of course, he wants to deny any of that disaster money to California because they didn't rake the forests. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Tribalization of Politics, How Rush Limbaugh's Race-Baiting Rhetoric on the Obama Presidency Paved the Way for Trump, by Ian Refowitz. Donald Trump owns, this is from the first chapter, Donald Trump owns conservative media 100% lock, stock, and barrel. Full of bluster and bombast, Trump uses modern media tools like Twitter to directly blast the nation with his unfiltered, uninformed, and uncivil messages at full volume. To those outside the conservative media bubble, it may seem as though Trump is the entire ballgame. Sure, Fox News is a presence, but the news channel has reconstituted itself these days as state media, singular in purpose, to prop up Trump's candidacy. Whatever the, quote, conservative message might be these days, it doesn't exist without Trump. It's Trump who sets the agenda. It is Trump who determines the message, and it is Trump who decides who best can sell it. 10 out of 10 times, it's Trump. Thus, in this world of Trump, 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 and more Trump, it is easy for the uninitiated to forget that in addition to the president's Twitter account, conservatives have built a massive media machine to promote a message that is often at odds with reality and the American mainstream. Forged in the aftermath of Barry Goldwater's 1964 landslide loss, this massive network of conservative TV, radio, print, and online outlets have allowed them to build an alternative reality so powerful and convincing that entire swaths of the country are held in thrall. A Pew study in 2017 found that 40% of Trump voters relied on Fox News as their main source of news. Meanwhile, only 3% of Hillary Clinton voters relied on any cable news channel as their primary source of information. Conservative websites like the Daily Caller and Breitbart reach millions. Social media like Facebook and Twitter is awash in conservative voices, further amplified by Russian bots. And the dark web has given voice to the darkest fringes of the conservative world, from white supremacists to conspiracy theorists like the QAnon crew, convinced of a deep state conspiracy against Trump, fueled by child sex traffickers like Hillary Clinton. But nothing reaches more conservative voices than AM radio. Once the province of music stations, the emergence of FM radio led to a mass migration to the higher quality band that left AM radio in severe decline. Talk radio didn't require that same level of quality audio, and station operators embraced the format. The elimination of the Fairness Doctrine in 1987 made it possible for conservatives to take over the dial without concern that political balance was required. And in 1988, a certain Rush Limbaugh launched his nationally syndicated show. It's hard to overstate just how dramatically important Limbaugh has been in defining conservative thought and ideology, with an audience that has at times reached into the tens of millions. No single conservative personality outside of modern-day Trump has had this kind of reach or influence. And unlike Fox News, which actively makes conservatives stupid, Limbaugh's method of misinformation has always been rooted in a more solid foundation of truthiness. A 2007 survey by Pew Research found that Limbaugh listeners demonstrated among the highest knowledge levels in response to a battery of political current affairs questions, with 79% having either a high or moderate level. Among Fox News viewers, the number was only 65%. second to last, with nightly news watchers faring worse. Here's a funny aside. The most informed were watchers of Comedy Central's Daily Show and Colbert Report, also at 79% combined, but with a larger number of high levels of knowledge. But knowing the names of the vice president, governor, and speaker of the House is only base-level knowledge. Limbaugh may accurately impart such information, but as this book shows, his pernicious twisting of facts, out-of-context quotes, and toxic editorializing have done far worse damage to our country than whether someone knows or doesn't know the name of the Supreme Court, of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. If you are anything like me, the sheer amount of misinformation stated by Rush Limbaugh in the pages ahead will shock and anger you deeply. Not just about how Limbaugh twisted the truth. As Ian notes early on, Limbaugh launched his coverage of the Obama presidency with 4 simple words: I hope he fails. With that goal in mind, nothing would stop Limbaugh from spending the next years reinforcing the narrative of failure. The truth never stood a chance. What makes this so infuriating is that Limbaugh decided that lies and policy differences weren't enough to make Obama a failure. Instead, he had to other him, turning white America against him. And he did that with pure, unfiltered, unadulterated racism. I was shocked when Ian first told me about this project. He's literally going to go through 8 years of Rush Limbaugh transcripts. I was shocked again when he told me he was finished. He actually read 8 years of Rush Limbaugh transcripts. But that was nothing like the jolt from seeing the result of that thankless labor. His comprehensive transcribing of Limbaugh's hate, always in full context. What these pages show are the words of a white supremacist. And you'll find yourself, like me, wondering how the hell he has gotten away with talking like a KKK Grand Dragon in modern-day America. There's nothing subtle about what you're about to read. For example, when Barack Obama talked about the disparities in policing between white and black Americans, as objective and uncontroversial an observation as possible, Limbaugh happily ranted about the president carrying out, quote, a purposeful effort here to divide people in this country along racial lines, end quote. Pointing out racism to conservatives is always worse than the actual racism itself. The book, The Tribalization of Politics by Ian Refowitz.
On this week's Science Revolution, Ethan Manuel with Sierra Club's Land Protection Program is here on Trump greenlighting drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Will the oil companies show up? Adrian Shelley with Public Citizen is dropping by on the methane rule rollback and the Trump administration's continued assault on our climate. Lori Lodes with Climate Power 2020 is excited about Biden and Harris painting a bold climate action plan with clean energy jobs. Plus, in geeky science, there's a new study out. Do plant-based meats improve your heart? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. There was an extraordinary moment today in my inbox, in my email inbox, that I wanted to share with you. I thought it was just remarkable, and I was very impressed. Axios produces a whole bunch of different newsletters. They've become quite a news agency, and they push them out as daily email newsletters. And one of the ones that I've subscribed to for a very long time, I think probably from the time that it first started, is the Axios Markets newsletter. And, it's about finance and the economy and markets and stuff like that. It's one of the things, probably the two big things that I talk about on this show, in addition to just, kind of raw politics, are science and economics. And so I'm fascinated by this stuff. And so I've been subscribing to this newsletter for a long, long time, and it's written every day by a guy by the name of Dion, D-I-O-N, and I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. It's R-A-B-O-U-I-N, Raboin? I'm not sure. And my apologies, Dion, if you're, watching this on YouTube or something, days later, and I've mangled your name. But he starts out, he says the one big thing, justice. And now typically this is, this company's buying that company, and here's what's happening in the stock market, and here's, the Fed just said, and all this kind of stuff. And instead he writes, I can't write a newsletter today. And in the next paragraph, he talks about how, the NBA players went on strike. And he says, whenever someone stands up to fight for justice, one must always ask whether that stand is a moment or a movement. Now, this is a conversation I had with Joe Madison a couple of weeks ago on this show. Actually, more like a month ago when we were talking about, the protests around the murder of George Floyd. Is this a moment or a movement? And, we're both very hopeful it's a movement. But anyhow, back to Dion's newsletter. He says, whenever someone stands up to fight for justice, one must always ask whether that stand is a moment or a movement. I hope that what the NBA started last night was a movement. I hope it was a movement for change and a movement for justice and equality. I don't have much to give to that movement, but I have my body and I have my mind and I have this little newsletter that you all read. Maybe I can make a difference somehow by showing that you don't have to be a superstar to take a stand. Jacob Blake was shot in the back 7 times while walking away. To my eyes, he walked away because he was sick and tired of being harassed by armed agents of the state whose occupation is supposed to be to protect him. I don't know Jacob Blake, but I know what it's like to be tired of police harassment and to decide that enough is enough. So did Eric Garner. So did Sandra Bland. So did many others. This must end. I've been stopped, again, this is Dion, who writes the Axios Market newsletter, writing in his own voice. He says, I've been stopped and frisked. I've been assaulted. I've been thrown to the ground or on the hood of a car and handcuffed by these same armed agents of the state for the crime of looking suspicious or being in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong skin. And I know exactly what it's like to have that pit well up in the back of my throat as I decided that I had taken enough. I was fortunate enough not to end up dead or paralyzed. And then I just like, whoa, talk about speaking truth to power. He goes on to say, many of you reading this newsletter are CEOs, presidents, founders, and asset managers who oversee billions of dollars. If I have the chance to speak to you and say one thing from my heart, it is this. Understand that there is profound injustice happening in this country, and it has been happening for as long as any of us can remember, and it eats away at us every day. Nothing changes, Dion writes in the last paragraph of the newsletter that I got today. Nothing changes until people decide it's unconscionable for things to continue the way that they are. It feels like we may have reached that point, and I stand with the people who are taking a stand for change, even if all I have is this little newsletter. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, back to your calls. Michael in Chicago. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Tom. You were talking earlier about people waking up. I think I'm encountering people going to sleep in their mind. I have some people that I'm related to that were soft Trump supporters, and now they have gone full, not caring about the protesters and just the buildings. Just don't burn the buildings. Who cares about if the 2 protesters died? Or it's very sad.
Well, yeah, and I think we need to distinguish between the protesters and the rioters. I mean, or the people who are committing violence. That is not what John Lewis or Martin Luther King said to do or did in their lives. That's not the example that they lived in their lives. That said, I get it. Martin Luther King also said, a riot is the voice of the unheard, or words to that effect, and spot on. But the basic message that we're getting, and I think that's what you're pointing to, Michael, is that what we are seeing explicitly said, essentially, is that property is more important than people. And God forbid we should ever be in that place in this country again. Michael, thank you for the call. Mike in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Hey, Kenosha. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Cheese, greetings from our beautiful city along Lake Michigan.
How's your town doing?
I originally called about just to discuss winner take all, but if you don't mind, I'd like to also chime in very quickly on the RNC.
Go for it.
The rhetoric that I've heard is just over the top. To your point, I heard Marsha Blackburn, Tennessee Republican, talking about the Democrats want to promote violence and encourage riots. We heard Dee Dee Byrne talk about the Democrats support infanticide and killing of
infanticide,
babies.
That was another one of the lies that the Washington Post called out today. They said this is just a complete lie, by the way. And by the way, the Trump humpers keep saying this. Trump himself keeps saying this. The Democrats want abortion right up to the moment of birth. No, I'm sorry, this is a lie. Anyway, back to you.
Well, and last night when I was listening to the local radio stations about where the protests are, it's kind of like eye in the sky kind of thing, and reporting to the community, what's going on. Even those people that were had the microphones were talking about the Democrats are coming for your guns and all this stuff. And at some point, I couldn't listen to it anymore. I can't watch the RNC anymore. Unfortunately, I just wanted to support what you said earlier about the misinformation because it is rampant and it's obnoxiously repulsive.
I had quit drinking a few weeks ago because I was gaining weight and I didn't think it was healthy. And typically Louise and I would have a glass or two of wine, in the evening with dinner. But last night I was like, Louise, I have to have a glass of wine. This is halfway through the RNC. It was like, okay, I'm breaking down.
My friend. I'm with you. But we're thinking about in discussions we're having about local policing here in Kenosha. We're talking about the police need to look like the community. They need to have the same demographic percentage and representation. Then, of course, you take that thought a little bit further and say, we want our state and local government to look like our people, too. And then I couldn't help but think about winner-take-all on the national picture. Isn't the winner-take-all system of winner takes all the delegates from the state, even though if they only got 51% of the vote, isn't that counter to trying to be representative of the people that you represent? If you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, this is what you're describing is the Electoral College, Mike, and because if it was, the last president who was elected president for the first time with a majority of American voters was George Herbert Walker Bush in 1988. It has not happened since then. The majority of American voters did not vote for George W. Bush, and the majority of American voters did not vote for Donald Trump. And what we have is this Electoral College, which was put into place in large part because it took days for news to travel from one part of the country to the other. And, as Alexander Hamilton wrote in the Federalist Papers, they were concerned that, what would happen if a man of low morals, a drunkard, a man of ill repute, were to aspire to the post of president, with basically help from his friends. And, and the voters didn't realize that he was a sleazoid. And so, the idea was every community will express their preference and will find a wise elder in their community to send to Washington, D.C. to vote that preference. But that wise elder has the discretion, once they've met the candidates, to say, my state wanted me to vote for so-and-so, but he's a drunkard. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to vote for the other guy. That's all in the Constitution. That all became completely irrelevant and unnecessary with the advent of the railroads in the 1850s and 1860s. I mean, arguably it became irrelevant by 1810, with the Pony Express. So, Mike, I'm with you. And this is why nationalpopularvote.org is such an important website for you to know about and for you to push your state legislators
You're
around.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Because what it does is it does away with the Electoral College without amending the Constitution. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Terry in Oakland, California. Hey, Terry, what's up? Terry? Apparently no Terry. Okay, let's try Sean in Basehor, Kansas. Am I saying that right, Sean?
Hi, yes you are. How you doing, Mr. Hartman?
Okay, good. It says here you disagree with me. What's up?
Yeah, I do. I'll be honest with you. I've got some issues with actually your last caller and calling it rhetoric. I think there's a difference between using wisdom and rhetoric and what's going on these days right now. I think I also have a problem with I'm not understanding.
It's all very abstract, Sean. Can you tell me specifically what you're talking about?
Yeah, I apologize. My thing is, why aren't people in the communities in these cities stepping up to protect their own homes? Why aren't they getting out in full force to stop what's going on when they see it on TV? And they're just sitting and allowing
to protect
it.
their own homes. What are you talking about?
Right. Well, you've had situations with the BLM coming into neighborhoods, waking people up, shining flashlights, using foul language, cursing at one another, and sitting there saying, I used to live here. I'm black now.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, Sean. I'm guessing you watched something on Fox News that the rest of us didn't see. But what I'm not seeing that happening. I saw a bunch of right-wingers who were attacking people in a restaurant the other day, screaming, justice and chanting as if they were Black Lives Matter. But that's the only thing I've seen. I haven't seen anybody going after people's houses. That couple in Missouri who stood out in front of their house with guns. Those are people walking in the street in front of their house. They didn't.
They actually got on their property, Mr. Hartman. They actually
not until long after they came out with guns. Not until long after they came out with guns.
They came out with their guns or not.
You walk by.
They were protecting their home and their right to bear arms. And when somebody comes up on my property, I'm going to do the exact same thing.
Well, Sean, if you point a gun at somebody.
I didn't say point at
arguably, if they're
somebody
on your property and you can legitimately fear for your life, then you can point a gun at them. But that's not what happened. And I encourage you to go back and actually look at the videotape, not the edited version that Fox keeps playing, that shows the gate to the entire community.
I'm just talking about this. This is what's going to happen in our country when we allow Black Lives Matter group to walk down our streets, suburban streets, or just any street in America.
Right. How dare those black people walk down our white streets?
No, I'm not talking about black people.
I get it.
And
I get it. No, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible.
And I'm sick and
we can't. And people who are protesting, saying, "Wait a minute, the police should not be killing us." In our streets. Are you kidding?
There are Americans. They're not minorities. They're Americans. Why can't people wake up to this and realize that all of us are Americans?
So these black people who are walking through your white streets that you're so upset about, Sean, I'm sorry, we're out of time. I would have enjoyed continuing the conversation. Well, enjoyed is the wrong word, but I think there was more to do with that conversation, but we're out of time. We'll be right back. Stick around. It's coming up on 10 minutes before we go. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream.
Hey, we just put up a new video.
Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it.
Of our program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. is it Kala in Brooklyn, New York? C-A-U-L-A? I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
Yes.
Hi, Kala. Thank you for calling. What's up?
Hi. Well, I wanted to piggyback on a couple of awesome and amazing points you made today, and just bring up some recent events I don't know if you were aware of. But with the Jacob Blake situation, I very much agree with the was it the journalist? Are you referring to from Axios? What's his name? Dion?
Yeah, Dion Rabowen.
Yeah. When I'm a black woman, when I saw him walking away from the police, I said, this guy is fed up. He's walking away. He's like, I'm here to assist in an altercation, and they're targeting me. So I saw him.
Right, he went there to break up a fight.
Walking away. Right. I saw him I didn't see him being contentious. I didn't see him being. I saw a frustration. Like, it's amazing the perspective of different people. Now, in addition to that, on Twitter, there's been comparisons between the right-wing white supremacist. What is his name? Kyle. I forget his last name. And,
it doesn't matter what his name is.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. He's a murderer. And, they're showing images of him cleaning graffiti. And then you have Jacob Blake, and they're trying to, muddy his image. And the media, they're really, the mainstream media, it's just infuriating that the messaging that they're putting out there, The Kenosha police were giving him water. They were encouraging and endorsing his behavior. I see that they were telling them, there were recordings with the taping and the filming, that they were telling them, oh, yeah, we need your help. We need more of you guys out here assisting us. And the Kenosha Police Department has a history of corruption and framing individuals and deceit. So I believe it was in 2017, they were under federal investigation for all of the corruption going on and racial disparities and injustice in that same police department. So, I'm really glad that the NBA is stepping up. We need the NFL to step up. They know it. The majority of them have had the same experiences. Okay, even the Tim Scott, admitted to it. The lone black senator. So it's just a part of their lives. It's an intricate part of their lives. So we need the NFL, the NBA to continue, the NFL to continue the platform, the WNBA. They've been doing an amazing job, but it just can't be a moment. We have to keep pushing it. And, not just rhetoric. It has to be action. We have to get the representatives out there that are going to push our agenda. They're going to create policies that make real change. We need the action. We just don't need the words. So I hope, everyone's getting it, finally getting it. And then the other thing that I guess I'm just talking. I'm not. The other thing I wanted to discuss, you also spoke about that COVID didn't just is not the only thing that's affecting the black community disproportionately in the medical field, that it's just a litany of health issues that aren't hereditary. And I wasn't even aware of the fact that in the 1960s, how the hospitals were segregated and black people were treated last. And, but it's still going on at the present time. Are you aware of I'm pretty sure you know about him, Marion Sims, they call him the doctor of gynecology. He was praised.
The guy who was torturing black women. Yeah,
black women, right? So he said, they're not human beings. They don't need pain medication. And these practices, the mindset, it gets passed on in the medical field from generation to generation. You don't need attended to, need to be attended to. You're not material. And it goes on and on and on and on. And it's just so widespread. I mean, even when Serena Williams was she came out when she had her daughter, how she was not taken seriously. She suffered from blood clots.
Preeclampsia, wasn't
and
it?
Well, the preeclampsia, I don't remember that. I do remember specifically that she suffered from blood clots. And she was addressing the doctors, and they weren't listening to her. And then she almost, I think she went into shock. There was something very dramatic that happened. And she's Serena Williams, you know? She's supposed to have the best. And she acknowledged that she was not being attended to, listened to. We have African-American women, we're dying during childbirth disproportionately, you know? It's going on and on and on. So these were just a number of things that I wanted to piggyback on that you highlighted, and you're definitely on point. So
great, thank you, Colin. Yeah, and it's not that in my opinion, it's not that white doctors are sitting around going, "Oh, I'm going to be mean to black people." It is like deep in the psyche of this country and of anybody who grew up in this country.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Medical Apartheid, the Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present by Harriet A. Washington. This is from the introduction. On a sylvan stretch of New York's patrician Upper Fifth Avenue, just across from the New York Academy of Medicine, a colossus in marble, august inscriptions, and a bas-relief caduceus grace a memorial bordering Central Park. These laurels venerate the surgeon James Marion Sims, MD, as a selfless benefactor of women. Nor is this the only statuary erected in honor of Dr. Sims. Marble monuments to his skill, benevolence, and humanity guard his native South Carolina State House, its medical school, the Alabama Capitol grounds, and a French hospital. In the mid-19th century, Dr. Sims dedicated his career to the care and cure of women's disorders and opened the nation's first hospital for women in New York City. He attended French royalty, his Grecian visage inspired oil portraits, and in 1875 he was elected president of the American Medical Association. Hospitals still bear his name, including a West African hospital that utilizes the eponymous gynecological instruments that he at first invented for surgeries upon black female slaves in the 1840s. But this benevolent image vies with the detached Marion Sims portrayed in Robert Thom's J. Marion Sims, Gynecological Surgeon, an oil representation of an experimental surgery upon his powerless slave, Betsy. Sims stands aloof, arms folded, one hand holding a metroscope, the forerunner of the speculum, as he regards the kneeling woman in a coolly evaluative medical gaze. His tie and morning coat contrast with her simple servant's dress, head rag, and bare feet. The painting, commissioned and distributed by the Park Davis Pharmaceutical House more than a century after the surgeries, as one of its History and Medicine in Pictures series, takes telling liberties with the historical facts. Thom portrays Betsy as a fully clothed, calm slave woman who kneels complacently on a small table, hand modestly raised to her breast before a trio of white male physicians. Two other slave women peer around a sheet, apparently hung for modesty's sake, in a childlike display of curiosity. This innocuous tableau could hardly differ more from the gruesome reality in which each surgical scene was a violent struggle between the slaves and physicians, and each woman's body was a bloodied battleground. Each naked, unanesthetized slave woman had to be forcibly restrained by the other physicians through her shrieks of agony as Sims determinedly sliced, then sutured her genitalia. The other doctors who could fled when they could bear the horrific screams no longer. It then fell to the women to restrain one another. I wanted to reproduce Thom's painting on the cover of this book, or at least in the text, but when I asked permission of its copyright holder, Pfizer Incorporated, the company insisted on reviewing the entire manuscript of this book before making a decision. As an independent scholar, I could not acquiesce to this, and I used another cover image. When I renewed my request to use the image within the text, Pfizer agreed to base its decision upon reading this chapter and an outline of the book. The Pfizer executives apparently were uncomfortable with what they read because they refused to grant permission to reproduce this telling image or even respond to my query after I supplied the requested chapter and outline. This act of censorship exemplifies the barriers some choose to erect in order to veil the history of unconscionable medical research with blacks. Betsy's voice has been silenced by history, but as one reads Sims' biographers and his own memoirs, a haughty, self-absorbed researcher emerges, a man who bought black women slaves and addicted them to morphine in order to perform dozens of exquisitely painful, distressingly intimate vaginal surgeries. Not until he had experimented with his surgeries on Betsy and her fellow slaves for years did Sims essay to cure white women. Was Sims a savior or a sadist? It depends, I suppose, on the color of the women you ask. Marion Sims epitomizes the two faces, one benign, one malevolent, of American medical research. Quote, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhumane." In 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke those words in Montgomery, Alabama, at the end of the Selma to Montgomery march that had been attended by the black and white physicians of the Medical Committee for Human Rights. King had invited the doctors not only to give medical help to injured marchers, but also to witness the abuse suffered at the hands of segregationists. With these almost unnoticed words, King ushered in a new era in civil rights because, as Delegate to Congress Donna Christensen Christian, MD, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust, has declared, health disparities are the civil rights issue of the 21st century. Thus, Dr. King's alarm over racial health injustice was prescient, and were he alive today, his concerns would be redoubled. Mounting evidence of the racial health divide confronts us everywhere we look, from doubled black infant death rates to African American life expectancies that fall years behind whites. Infant mortality of African Americans is twice that of whites. The book, Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington. On the Couch by Justin Frank.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I'm so happy to have with me the smartest man I know, the distinguished professor of meteorology, the director of the Earth Systems Science Center at Penn State University, a member of the National Academy of Sciences, author of several books, including The Madhouse Effect, How Climate Change Denial is Threatening Our Planet, Destroying Our Politics, and Driving Us Crazy, the recipient of the Tyler Prize, Dr. Michael Mann. His website, michaelmann.net. Mann has two N's at the end, and his Twitter handle, Michael E. Mann. And Dr. Mann, welcome back. Thanks so much for joining us. The news headline in The Guardian a week or so ago was the Greenland ice sheet is losing 1 million tons of water per minute. What does that mean? That's hard to wrap my head around.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's good to be with you. And unfortunately, that is true. We are seeing unprecedented rates of melting of both the major ice sheets, the Greenland ice sheet and the most susceptible part of the Antarctic ice sheet, the West Antarctic ice sheet. And that's happening decades ahead of schedule relative to the projections from climate models just, a decade or so ago. So the good news, as bad as that sounds, is that there is no evidence that we are yet past sort of the tipping point where we are committed to the melting of those ice sheets. There were some headlines about a week ago that implied that we had crossed that tipping point. And scientists who study the dynamics of ice sheets tell us that's not true. In particular with Greenland, it's sort of shaped like a bowl with the mountains at the exterior and then lower elevation, sort of valley in the middle. And because of that, unlike the Antarctic ice sheet, it's very unlikely that it will continue to calve in very large pieces out into the ocean. What happens is as you start to lose parts of the periphery of the ice sheet, it establishes a new, what we call a grounding line, where the bedrock and the ice come into contact. And so it's sort of a bit of a stopper valve. It's unlikely to collapse catastrophically. That having been said, if we warm the planet up much beyond where we are, then we do think that we come close, if not cross the line, where we do ultimately commit to the melting of most of the Greenland ice sheet, most of the West Antarctic ice sheet, enough ice melt to give us about 20 or more feet of global sea level rise. And obviously that would be catastrophic.
Yeah, to say the very least. A week or so ago, there was an event, a weather event in Iowa. Actually, it spanned several states. That was a word I had never heard, and maybe I'm just poorly informed or something. But this Derecho, D-E-R-E-C-H-O, this that left 100,000 people without power. That knocked back mail service. People weren't getting their medications. Thousands of families in makeshift tents. It was a full-blown disaster. What is a Derecho, and why have we not heard about them before now? Or
I think it's Derecho. Derecho, and until a few years ago, we all thought it was something that you get at a Mexican restaurant, but no, in reality, it is. It's an atmospheric phenomenon. It's sort of in some ways it's like a tornado, but rather than twisting winds, it's an entire squall line of thunderstorms that are extremely broad, that can reach, across much of the Midwest, for example, and just comes sweeping across the country. And so you get this line, literally this sweeping line of tornadic winds, tornado, strength winds. It arises for the same reason, ultimately, that intense thunderstorms and tornadoes and hurricanes, like the one that we have just seen bear down on the Gulf Coast. They derive their energy in substantial part from the heat that's released when you evaporate moisture. And in particular, in this case, with a derecho, when you have a very cold or relatively cool, let's say, Arctic air mass, and it comes down and it meets one of these very humid, subtropical, sort of Gulf of Mexico air masses, that contrast in air masses along with the amount of energy that's available with all that moisture, leads to a lot of an instability in the atmosphere, towering clouds, and very strong storms. And these derechos appear to be coming more common. In fact, Washington, D.C. a few years ago experienced something much like this. It was a derecho that actually happened during an historic heat wave. You may remember, folks who lived in the D.C. area, you have unprecedented sort of triple-digit heat indices, and all of a sudden you lose all the electricity because of this derecho, this storm. And ironically, the same atmospheric conditions that led to the derecho are responsible for the extreme heat, the very warm, humid air mass that was there at the time. And so all of a sudden you're without electricity, you're without air conditioning. And it's sort of an example of the types of surprises and unintended consequences that we worry about, things that we haven't really gamed out, that we wouldn't have thought about until they happen, like, unprecedented heat followed by the loss of electricity because of these very strong winds associated with these derechos. So we think climate change is making the conditions more favorable for them, and they're devastating, right? We saw, how devastating that storm was for people who live in the Midwest. Iowans destroyed much of the agriculture that was there at the time. Crops were destroyed by this storm. These are the sorts of, when people talk about, it's going to cost us if we get off fossil fuels, it's costing us way more by remaining addicted to fossil fuels. And this is just one example of why. And I say that as we see a devastating storm making landfall in the east, and we see the West literally on fire.
So just to summarize, these derechos are caused by extraordinarily warm, moist air rising. And typically that would be associated with a tropical climate or a semi-tropical climate. But because the Midwest has been heating up as a result of global warming, and the Midwest is rich in moisture, they get a lot of rain, their soil is moist, and so that soil heats up unusually high, thus evaporating unusual amounts of moisture and transporting heat up into the atmosphere where it hits cold air coming in, and boom, you've got a derecho. Is that it? And that's the mechanism that global warming is, simply by warming up the area, it's producing this?
Yeah, it's what's happening. It's more or less what you just said. You have more of these very warm, humid air masses, and climate change, allows for more humidity in the atmosphere. A warmer atmosphere holds more humidity. So you've got a warmer, moister, more unstable atmosphere. And the match that lights, that fire is the collision with a cool, dry air mass, because then you get these very large contrasts, all of a sudden temperature, really strong sort of fronts. And those contrasts in temperature really start to get the atmosphere rising. The warm air rises over the cold air vertically. You get this deep convection. You get very strong storms and very strong winds. And so one of the crucial ingredients there are the very warm, humid air masses that we expect to see more of in a warmer climate. You're always going to have that source of relatively cool, dry air in the Arctic. That's always going to be there, but is coming into it's basically colliding with increasingly warmer, moister air masses, creating those conditions for these derechos, thunderstorms, tornadoes, and other types of extreme weather events.
Michael, we just have 15 seconds till we hit the break. If Biden gets elected and does something about the climate, is there still time?
Yeah, absolutely. There is, as I like to say, great urgency. We have to act now. There is agency. There is still time to act. And if we vote on this issue, if we vote on climate in the upcoming election, we can make a real difference here.
Amen. Dr. Michael Mann, thank you, my friend. Thank you so much for dropping by today. It's always great talking with you.
Thank you, my friend.
Good talking with you. Michael Mann with 2Ns.net is his website, and his Twitter handle is Michael E. Mann, M-A-N-N. And his book, his latest book, The Madhouse Effect, it's absolutely brilliant. You need to get it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour, back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Joanne in Seattle. Hey, Joanne, thanks for holding so long. What's up?
Tom, I wanted to see if you felt like this. To me, there's two words that have really messed up the swing voters, the ones that haven't made up their mind, and that is defund the police. Now, you and I know what that means, but, you know, these other right-wingers, they want to, you know, interpret it wrong. So I'm thinking that if us people that care about black lives, if we all boycotted the corporate America, that might help. Like the LBGT people, they made so much progress all the way to the top, to the courts, to make things legal. So I think this would be a great way to, and they've started it by the football and baseball and whatnot, but I'm talking about boycotting the corporate America places. I know that we're in a hell of a mess with the financial stuff, but what do you think?
I think that's a great idea, Joanne, and it might be a good starting point. The problem with boycotts is that since the economy has become so monopolized, you've got very small collections of very large companies that dominate every industry in the United States now, unlike 40 years ago. It's really hard to have a focused boycott that has any impact, and it's really, in particular, because so many essential goods are controlled by these large corporations. I do think there are lessons learned from what the gay community did for years and years, both in AIDS activism, the whole ACT UP thing, and also in civil rights activism and marriage equality. And part of that was getting very politically active and aggressively supporting political candidates for office who support your agenda. Part of it was, being visible. The whole ACT UP thing in the 80s and 90s was really, kind of forced Reagan ultimately, or certainly George Herbert Walker Bush, to back down. Reagan refused to say AIDS for 8 years. It was a crime, basically. So I think there's lessons there, but I think the extraordinary lessons that we all learned about civil rights were lessons taught us by people like Martin Luther King and John Lewis. Persist and be nonviolent. But I'm not in that movement specifically. I mean, I'm not an African American, so my perspective might be a little different. But did anything I just said make sense, Joanne? I feel like I'm blithering here.
Yeah, I get it. But I think that between defunding the police and then all the people that come into the marches, the rioters, then that's, it's a setup. It's a setup to for the Republicans to say, yeah, they're out of control, and our world is threatened, and, the police are fine.
I agree. And people who are doing property damage are simply creating television ads for Donald Trump. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And it's very unfortunate. On the other hand, you're stuck with this bizarre dynamic where if you just show up and peacefully protest, it never makes the news. Whereas if you set something on fire, it does. But then it defeats you, it hurts you. Joanne, it's a tough one. I don't have an easy answer here. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So Tucker Carlson last night was defending this 17-year-old Trump humper who murdered 2 people in Kenosha and wounded another. It looks like the person that he wounded might even lose his entire arm. These AR-15s, the bullets that they shoot are very high velocity and they cause incredible damage. I mean, we learned a lot of this back, with the school shootings years ago, where that young man, went in and, well, it seems like they're always young men doing it. But in any case, Tucker Carlson went on TV last night and said, and I quote, "Are we really surprised that looting and arson accelerated murder? How shocked are we that 17-year-olds with rifles decided they had to maintain order when no one else would?" Really, no one else would? The police were there. I retweeted a video yesterday afternoon of a bunch of, of these right-wing guys. This kid was apparently part of this group, saying, talking among themselves, talking about, and they were right next to the police cars, talking about how the police had said, we're going to push the protesters into you guys and then you beat them up. Well, that's what happened here in Portland a couple days ago. And the cops just stood there for 3 hours watching right-wingers beat up left-wingers by and large and threaten them with guns. Now, nobody got shot, but people have gotten shot here and in other cities in the past by right-wingers. But, I mean, this is astonishing. As Keith Boykins over at CNN said, an innocent black guy is killed by police and Tucker Carlson calls him a thug. A guilty white guy murders 2 people and Tucker Carlson calls him a patriot. But the point that I would make, and that I haven't heard anybody else make, and I don't know why, and tell me if you think I'm just like way out on a limb here, that I'm crazy. When you buy and learn how to use a gun, and then you travel hours or miles, let's say. I guess Kenosha is only 15, 20 minutes away from Antioch, Illinois, but you travel to another state with that gun. I would not call that anything other than hunting. How is this Trump-loving kid showing up at, sitting in the front row of Trump rallies? How is he anything other than a hunter of humans, looking for someone to kill? I mean, I'm reminded of Don Jr. and Eric going off on their big game hunts, and now, we pay for their security when they do it. Looking to kill, I've seen them with dead leopards, I've seen them with dead elephants, I've seen them with dead muskox, endangered species. They take their guns, they go off on a hunting trip, and they kill something. And it looks to me like this kid, I shouldn't even call him a kid. I keep saying that because he's 17 years old, but he's a killer, he's a murderer. He is a human hunter, a predator. Or am I being too harsh? Or is it, is the media not calling him this because he's white? Is that the deal? Oh, we wouldn't call a white person a predator. Black people are predators. Years ago, Hillary Clinton, in an inarticulate moment, referred to black super predators. It haunted her it has haunted her for the rest of her life. It's deep in our consciousness, as I was saying earlier about, medical care in the United States. It's just buried inside there, and every now and then it pops up, at least for white people, and I'm guessing for black people too, because we all grew up in the same damn culture, by and large. The same TV shows, the same movies. And every now and then it pops up and goes, ah! And we're like, whoa, where'd that come from? But with Tucker Carlson, it's just a nonstop stream. It's like, diarrhea on Fox News. It's always coming out. It never stops. But why aren't we referring to this killer as a predator? Why aren't we referring to many of the people who came to these protests not looking to say, hey, stop an injustice. And I can tell you, I'm going to get a call from a right-winger who's going to say, well, what about the black people who came in from out of town to burn down that gas station? Weren't they predators? I'd say, no, they are asking, some of them in ways that are not particularly useful and probably even hurt their own cause, but they are asking that we stop killing them. That's a very different thing from putting a gun in your car and driving to another state to shoot people. I mean, think about this for a minute. What actually happened here? We have human beings, we have citizens of this country who are going on hunting trips, and they're showing up here in Portland, and they showed up this one showed up in Kenosha, and they're taking their weapons with them. Isn't it about time that we woke the hell up to what's going on? I'll be back with your calls after this. It's coming up on 28 minutes.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. We'll be right back.
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, "In light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air." End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. Harley Zephyr.
On this week's Science Revolution, Ethan Manuel with Sierra Club's Land Protection Program is here on Trump, greenlighting drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Will the oil companies show up? Adrian Shelley with Public Citizen is dropping by on the methane rule rollback and the Trump administration's continued assault on our climate. Lori Lodes with Climate Power 2020 is excited about Biden and Harris painting a bold climate action plan with clean energy jobs. Plus, in geeky science, there's a new study out. Do plant-based meats improve your heart? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Sharon in Colby, Wisconsin. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I'm a lifelong swing voter, and I voted for President Obama. I then voted for Trump, and I am now going to be supporting Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I went... When Trump won, I said, thank God he won. And within about 3 months, I went to, oh my God, can America survive this? So I basically deprogrammed myself. I went back and I detective worked backwards and found that information I had been fed had come from Gussifer 2.0. But at that time, it hadn't come out what Gussifer 2.0 was. And I also filled out forms for Cambridge Analytica. So I don't know anything. I can only speak on my own experience. But basically, I deprogram myself. So if there's anything you might want to ask, if I can shed any perspective.
Sure. Sharon, I'm curious. I find it fascinating that you determined that basically you were the victim of Russian disinformation campaigns in 2016, with apparently the help and collusion of other countries and Republicans in the United States like Paul Manafort. But what were the specific things that caused you to think that Trump would be a good thing for this country? I can think of several things that he said that if they were true and taken at face value would be probably good things. I'm curious what they were for you.
Well, one of the big things for me was that there had been something with some sort of a problem he had with putting up a flag on one of his properties, and that it didn't go along with some sort of one of their rules or laws or whatever, and that he got around that by building up the ground or whatever, and then did it. But the thing is, so that made me see that, he's out there, he's fighting to do right. But back then I didn't realize I didn't realize that the money he paid for it with came out of money that people had donated for other things. He didn't pay for it himself.
Oh, yeah. Surprise, surprise. So basically it was his false assertion of patriotism, and you ultimately realized that his first interest was not the United States. It was Trump and his family. Is that a good summary?
Pretty much. And then I started, well, the big thing was, I guess I started fact checking, and you can't be a good Trump supporter if you fact check. Mm-hmm. You can't support Trump. Once you fact check and get the facts, you see through it. But it's like I deprogrammed myself. And what caused me to notice or to be able to even see that was my sister, something had happened with someone, and they were going to be prosecuted for it. And my sister's reaction was, "Oh, that bitch." And I thought, oh, my gosh, the person's innocent until proven guilty. And that was that tribal attitude. And that really put a red flag up. Yeah. So that even pushed me harder to start checking facts.
Trying to figure out what was going on. Sharon, fascinating. Thank you so much for calling and sharing your experiences with us. I truly appreciate it. Thank you. Terry in Orlando, Florida. Hey, Terry, what's up?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to talk about the racism, structural racism regarding COVID-19, and something I think that is missing besides the socioeconomic factors is I think there's been racism in medical research that has neglected something that 6.25 million Americans have but are largely undiagnosed, and that's something called G6PD deficiency. And the Black Panthers pioneered awareness and screening for this over 50 years ago after the U.S. military first discovered it when black soldiers died when they were given malaria medications. It's a trait that mostly people have that are in areas of the world where their ancestors were in the areas of the world where malaria was present, is present. So mostly people of color, but also people like myself of Mediterranean descent. And so the civilian research basically has pretty much ignored this, and it's been mostly military.
Yeah, this is, just to cut to the chase here, Terry, this is a recessive characteristic on the X chromosome that has metabolic effects, but it has never been clearly linked to COVID, certainly. There are all kinds of wild-ass theories out there, including that, COVID is worse in the black community because of vitamin D deficiency, which, you can create a logic chain where you say, oh, well, that makes a certain amount of sense because the darker your skin, the less vitamin D you produce, and none of us get enough sunlight. But when you look at the simple epidemiology of this, the rates at which black people are dying from COVID, the excess rates at which they're dying from COVID, are easily explained when you compare them. There's two major factors that numerous epidemiologists have pointed to. One is that they're more likely to be working in those kinds of professions, those frontline professions where they are likely to be in contact with COVID or to be living in higher density housing situations. And, obviously not true of all black people, but of a substantial portion of the population. And the lack of a healthcare system that actually cares for and takes care of black people. Again, if you look at the percentage of black people who die from a heart attack versus white people, the percentage of black people who die from strokes versus white people, the percentage of black people who die from diabetes versus white people, none of these have to do with G6PD deficiencies. They have to do with a criminal and racist healthcare system, basically. Society, culture, actually.
Both can be true at the same time. I don't disagree.
I'm just saying the science isn't there yet.
You are saying,
and
I don't dispute anything, but the point is we need the data released from the military. The military knows all the G6PD status of everyone. There are biochemical reasons why the whole purpose of G6PD is to protect the cells.
Right. Terry, I'm going to stop this right here because I just, whenever somebody comes along and says, hey, I've got it figured out, or I know, or the military knows all about it, it's like all kinds of alarm bells go off for me. Anyhow, Nicole in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Hey, Nicole, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I was calling to talk about the group of Black Lives Matter people that are marching. They're literally walking, and a lot of us are following them in Wisconsin. And one of the leaders that is not part of the Black Lives Matter movement is Tory Lowe. They have been experiencing in every state, including Kenosha. When they started walking to Kenosha, a gentleman took a huge gun and pointed it at them, and he was ready to shoot them. And that guy.
Well, one of their people got shot yesterday, Nicole. It's the second.
Yes,
two of their people out of 60. Two of their people have been shot.
Yeah.
In Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah, and then the police lied, and I mean, it's ridiculous because every place they went, there were counties that treated them beautiful. Like the mayor wanted to meet them, they fed them. So it shows the love of some white people. Like they never experienced black people in some very remote parts of Indiana, and they said they wanted to walk with them. But the guy that did the shooting in Pennsylvania, Tory Lowe said, please put your gun down. Here's a minister. And he put his gun down, and then he acted like he didn't do anything, and he wanted to talk regular and have a regular conversation and shake their hand. And, and the police was attacking the Black Lives Matter and demonizing the Black Lives Matter. I'm hoping they'll make it to D.C. alive at the rate they're going.
I agree with you, and I put this at the feet of Donald Trump, although obviously racism in this country goes back 400 years, but he has politicized the police. He's been doing this for 3 years. He's been doing it for 4 or 5 years, actually, saying that basically the police are on his side. The police are worried about, black people. Reagan played this game. I don't think of all the institutions that it is dangerous to politicize, those at the top of the list are the police and the military, the people who carry guns and can legally kill people. And Donald Trump has been doing that. And as you point out, Nicole, this is the consequence of it. And so you get this relatively small number of, insecure, neurotic, frightened white people, and hate-filled as well, although hate typically comes out of fear, who are well-armed, and this kind of stuff happens. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, your media support group for We the People. And welcome back, Lorraine in San Diego. Hey, Lorraine, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
I want to share a deliberate tactic that the post office is employing to discourage use of the post office. And it's happened to me. The post office is deliberately returning pre-sorted first-class mail to the sender. This has been pre-sorted by the machines. And the reason I know this is because I subscribe to a post office service called Informed Delivery, and I'm notified what mail is incoming, so I can see what to expect in my mailbox. And when I don't get that, I let them know that I haven't received it. Well, recently I've received notices primarily from commercial senders like bills and financial institutions that the post office has returned their mail saying that the address is incorrect. The address is not incorrect. So I suspect that this is a deliberate attempt to shift people away from using the mail, paper copies, to electronic services. However, when you use electronic services, I prefer the paper notifications because you get the stuffers, you get to see, say, for example, your electric bill. You get to see the breakdown of things. You're not likely to do that if you subscribe, if you do it electronically. You get the little
newsletter and stuff. Lorraine, we know that Louis DeJoy and his predecessor have presided over the destruction of over 600 high-speed sorting machines all around the country, and that they're doing and DeJoy in particular has done a lot of other steps to slow down the mail in the last few months. The old Republican strategy of starve the beast, as David Stockman laid it out during the Reagan administration when he was Reagan's budget director, was very simple. You damage a government institution, whether it's the post office or the IRS or the Social Security Department or whatever it may be. You damage that government institution so that they can't do their job well. And then when they don't do their job well, the people yell and scream about it. And then you respond to the people by saying, you're absolutely right. They're not doing their job well. We should replace them with this wonderful for-profit company that just happens to sponsor my campaign. And, obviously in the case of Social Security, it would be the big banks. Let's let them take it over. Medicare, it would be the big insurance companies. The post office, it would be Louis DeJoy's, company or one of the others, UPS or FedEx. So might it not be that what you're experiencing isn't so much some sort of intentional plan to basically get people who are, recipients of bills and things, pre-sorted first-class mail, but rather is the consequence of the system being squeezed so hard by each one of those 600 machines could sort, 30, 40,000 pieces of mail an hour, thousands of times, or dozens of times anyway, faster than individuals could. Couldn't it just be that this is the result of this campaign that we've seen against the post office since 2006?
It's possible, but it should be delivered to my mailbox, not returned to the sender saying the address is incorrect. There's a problem there with the address being incorrect. And I'm concerned that the postcards that people are sending out to get people to vote are going to be destroyed too, that they won't make it to their intended addressees. So I just wanted to share that.
I'm concerned about it too, Lorraine. I am. And if you've requested an early ballot and it hasn't arrived yet, double check, call them, raise some hell. Lorraine, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. The hidden history of the Supreme Court tells the story of Nixon and Reagan's committing treason to steal the White House. Thom Hartmann here with you, fair and only slightly unbalanced. Dan in Norfolk, Virginia. Hey, Dan, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you today?
Good.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yep, I'm here. Yep.
Yeah.
We have there's a delay. It gets worse as we go into the third hour of the show for some reason. It has something of weirdness with the internet, but we're going to step on each other if we try to do that dance, Dan. So just start talking.
Okay. Well, we got, you asked where the kid's mother was. From what I understand, she drove him to the event.
To Kenosha?
Yes.
With an AR-15?
Yes.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. That is, that's child abuse. I mean, that although he's not a child, I suppose, but I've seen pictures of him when he was 10 years old with an assault weapon too. I can't confirm that, Dan, and so anybody listening, don't take that as gospel. But where'd you get the information, Dan?
I believe I heard it on either John's show or Dean's show last night. I've seen it on Facebook. I've heard it on one of the shows on this channel
More than
last
one
night.
source. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to fact check it, but that's mind-boggling. That's very, very sad too. The kid in Newtown who shot up the school in Newtown, his mother was the actual owner of those guns, and she used to let him play with those guns too. But anyway, thank you for the call, Dan. Edna in Indian Lake Estates, Florida. Edna, it says you disagree with me about what?
About what you're saying about the Black Lives Matter. I agree with the original concept of that program, but now it has gone beyond that. Antifa has also infiltrated with the Black Lives Matter. You've got to admit that. Everybody does. You're only showing one side of it. And
Edna, what is Antifa?
What is Antifa?
Uh-huh.
Are you pretending you don't know what Antifa is?
I do not know of any organization called Antifa in the United States. I don't know of any city where there's an office you can call Antifa. I don't know of any address for Antifa. What I do know is that ANTIFA is an abbreviation for anti-fascist. My father was an anti-fascist. He volunteered to fight in World War II and joined the Army in 1945. He was proudly an anti-fascist. I am proudly an anti-fascist. But to the best of my knowledge, there is no such organization as Antifa. There are people who proclaim that they are opposed to fascism in the United States, and they sometimes refer to themselves as anti-fascists or Antifa. But as far as I can tell, that organization only exists in the minds of Fox News hosts.
Oh, okay.
Please tell me where they are. If you can tell me where they are, Edna.
You are one of those.
No, I'm serious. Tell me where they are.
I'm serious, too. I'm a very serious person. You are one of those that have completely gone off the deep end with the Democrats. You are ignoring everything that's going on. Everything that's going on in this world, you guys are ignoring it. All of this stuff that's going on in the different states.
So what's going on, Edna? Are you talking about black people out of control?
No, I'm talking about the rioting. The rioting is not strictly Black Lives Matter. It is a group, and I can't remember the man's name who is behind all of this. He's financing it.
Are you talking about the Jewish guy, George Soros?
Soros, that's him. That's his name, yes. He's financing all this.
Edna, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh. Edna, you are the victim of an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. George Soros is not financing any of the so-called rioting, none. You've got people who hate Jews and hate black people who are promoting what you are saying.
I am saying that he is paying for all of these ridiculous people to come in and infiltrate.
Edna, you're being lied to.
No,
these people are lying to you.
You are being absolutely not paying attention to what's going on. You're blinded. You're blinded by the media and everything else. Did you hang up on me?
No, I'm still here. I just don't know what to say. I mean,
there's really nothing you
protocols
can say.
This started back in 1910 or thereabouts with the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, that there was this international Jewish conspiracy. The Steve Bannon crowd picked this thing. Well, actually, Viktor Orban in Hungary has been promoting this for years.
What I'm talking about
George
has nothing to do with the Jewish people.
George Soros has funded...
My husband was a Marine in World War II, a very proud Marine.
Then he was Antifa. Your husband was Antifa. He was not opposed to fascism?
Aren't we all? And that's what the Democrats are.
Well, I think so. So, Edna, you're Antifa, too. Join me in opposing fascism.
No. I am opposing the Democrats' way of thinking about what they're going to do, what Biden is supposed to be thinking about doing. This is totally.
For example, what?
Example,
what does Biden want to do that's so bad?
Okay, they're wanting to take away all of your guns. I am a lifetime member of the NRA, proud of it.
Edna, respectfully, let me just pause you for a second.
Yes.
I cannot think of any Democrat ever who says they're going to take away all your guns. The proposal that was made, which was supported by Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush,
I'm talking about
and was passed during the Clinton administration, was to stop having weapons of war on the streets of America, the assault weapons ban. That's, as far as I know, that's it.
That's just the beginning. That's just the beginning. Once they get that over, then they'll take everything. I am a hunter.
No, that's not what people are saying, Edna. That's what the people who are lying to you are saying. If you're okay with weapons of war on the streets and fascists in our streets, you can't call yourself an anti-fascist, Edna.
And for the right to carry a gun, to have a gun in my home.
Okay. Edna, I'm sorry, we're out of time. It's the end of the show. But thank you for the call. I hope you can call again sometime and we can have another conversation. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, be nice to your friends and neighbors. Even those who have joined the cult. We'll see you tomorrow. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!